Week 26 overview: Greek science, mathematics, and philosophy. This is a great week. Children can be so different, sometimes it's hard to find something that interests everyone each week. That's not the problem this time. No matter what your kids are interested in, there's probably something that happened this week that ties into it. Science, politics, philosophy, music, medicine, drama, literature, sports, you name it, the Greeks were all over it. If your children are working on a play this unit, they already know a lot about Greek drama. This is your chance to catch up. Greek drama started off as a festival in honor of the god Dionysus. In Athens, this turned into more and more of a show. The Athenians perfected tragedy, comedy, and a bawdy kind of theater called a satyr play. Greek drama was very stylized. There were seldom more than 2 actors on stage, never more than 3. Women never acted, so female roles were played by men. Violence was never shown on stage. They took people out back to kill them and drag them back on stage dead. The actors were supplemented by a chorus that sang and danced in front of the stage between the major speeches. Drama is just one field the Greeks practically invented. Mathematics, as we know it, is another. Who could get through math without learning about Pythagoras, for example? Pythagoras is a fascinating character. He didn't leave us anything in writing, but what we know of him is remarkable. He was a man of science and a religious mystic, too. His disciples had to follow a long list of rules that seem pretty bizarre to us today. Don't eat beans, or touch white roosters, or look into a mirror beside a light. Pythagoras taught that there were 3 kinds of men. To illustrate this, he noted the 3 kinds of people who come to the Olympic Games. One kind just comes to buy and sell, making money off the games. The group above them comes to compete, seeking honor. But the best, according to Pythagoras, are those who simply come to look. Men are lovers of gain, lovers of honor, or lovers of wisdom. In Greek, a lover of wisdom is a philosophon. That's where our word philosopher comes from. Every schoolboy knows Pythagoras' name, thanks to the Pythagorean theorem. He proved that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of its sides. But that isn't all that Pythagoras left behind. He's the one who discovered the mathematical relationships that underlie the notes of our musical scale. This didn't surprise him, really. Pythagoras believed that all things, ultimately, are numbers, just numbers, and nothing else. The Greeks drew a big distinction between numbers and figures. We don't. We think of geometry and arithmetic as just 2 different branches of mathematics, but the Greeks didn't. The great geometer Euclid didn't have much time for counting beans like Pythagoras. Many Greeks were interested in geometry, but none of them presented what they found as elegantly as Euclid did. For the next 2,200 years, the system he described in his Elements was simply the geometry. Archimedes was another Greek mathematician, but he was also a physicist, engineer, astronomer, and philosopher. Archimedes was born in the seaport colony of Syracuse, in what is now Sicily, down past the toe of Italy. There are way too many stories about Archimedes to squeeze in here, but the one that people remember best is the one about him running down the street stark naked yelling "Eureka," which means, in Greek, "I have found it." He'd been given the task of figuring out whether a certain crown was really made of gold or if the gold was mixed with some other substance. This was a hard problem. Nobody had ever figured out a way to solve it back then. Today, we might take a minute amount of gold from the crown and run it through some fancy spectroscope, but Archimedes didn't have one of those. If it had been a coin, he could have just weighed it. Pure gold has a certain density, so every gold coin has a particular size and ought to weigh exactly the same amount. Now, you can make a nice gold-colored alloy by mixing different metals together, but they don't weigh as much as gold does. But this crown was crown-shaped, not coin-shaped, so there was no way to tell how much it ought to weigh. If he could have melted down the crown, it would have been easy. Then he could have measured the exact volume of material, as if it were made up of so many coins, but that would have ruined the crown. How could he find the volume of the crown without melting it? How could he find the density of the crown without knowing the volume? He wrestled with this problem, but he got no closer to a solution. He was still thinking about it when he went to the public baths. As he climbed into a full tub, the water spilled out over the side, and suddenly he saw the solution. The water that spilled out over the side had the same volume as his body did. Archimedes didn't have to melt himself down to find out what his own volume was. The bathtub told him that. So he didn't have to melt the crown down to find its volume either. All he had to do was lower the crown into a container full of water and then measure how much water spilled out. That would tell him the volume of the crown. Well, then he could measure out exactly that much pure gold and put it in a balance scale. If the crown balanced out exactly evenly with an equal volume of pure gold, then it was pure gold. If it didn't, it wasn't, and somebody's head would roll. Archimedes helped defend his town of Syracuse against Roman warriors. They say he built a death ray out of hundreds of mirrors, as well as many other instruments of war. The Romans were so impressed with him that they planned to spare him when they finally conquered Syracuse. Unfortunately, they never got the word out to the rank and file. One of the Roman soldiers killed him where he sat drawing figures in the sand. His last words, according to legend, were, "Please don't disturb my circles." Archimedes was not the only Greek who put his thoughts ahead of life itself. As we've noted before, Socrates was tried and executed by the Athenians for corrupting the youth of Athens. He had the bad habit of asking questions that made his neighbors look like fools, which wasn't hard because they all thought they were so wise. The saying that no man was wiser than Socrates seemed ridiculous to Socrates. His wisdom consisted only in this: he knew that he didn't know anything, while all his neighbors thought they did. But that wisdom and their foolishness was enough to persuade a majority to put him to death. That's the problem with pure democracy, as the Athenians practiced it. No man's life, liberty, or property was safe if 51% of the citizens wanted to take it away. Plato and Aristotle thought hard about this problem. Plato was Socrates' student, and Aristotle was Plato's, and Aristotle had a famous student of his own, Alexander the Great, who conquered everything in sight. But that's another story. We'll get to him next week. Plato wrote his masterpiece, The Republic, to discuss what justice is and how it can be achieved. In the process, he decided that the ideal state would be ruled by philosopher kings. Aristotle had a different take on government. He divided up the types of government into their logical categories: the rule of one, the rule of the few, or the rule of the many. Each of these three kinds of governments could be devoted to the good of the ruler or to the good of the people who were ruled. A good version of government and a bad version. This resulted in 6 different kinds of government. Government by the one for the good of the people is monarchy, ruled by a king. If the king looks out for his own interests instead of those of his people, he's a tyrant, though, and his government is a tyranny. Government by a few for the good of the many is an aristocracy, the government of the best. But the same few would become an oligarchy if they only looked out for themselves. When the mob seeks its own interest, Aristotle called it a democracy. When the multitudes seek the good of the whole, on the other hand, he called that constitutional government. The Greeks made breakthroughs in field after field. Hippocrates was a Greek physician who's called the father of medicine. Before his time, Greeks knew almost nothing about human anatomy because the Greeks forbade dissection of any creature, even animals. Hippocrates was the first Greek to reject the idea that gods or demons caused all sickness. He thought disease came from diet, living habits, or the environment. He thought 4 bodily fluids were responsible for health and sickness: blood, bile, black bile, and phlegm. Although doctors no longer believe in these 4 humors, those concepts still show up in our vocabulary. Melancholy means black bile, and we still talk about being good-humored. Hippocrates wasn't 100% right, but he still broke new ground. Why was it that the Greeks did so in so many different areas? One reason may be they weren't looking for religious or magical explanations for the things they saw around them. Most other cultures at this time tried to explain everything in terms of the gods. It rains because Baal, the storm god, sends rain to water the ground. Or, we have crops because Astarte, the goddess of fertility, gave the increase. The Greeks were looking for natural explanations, not supernatural explanations, and they got a lot further than their superstitious neighbors did. Does that mean that atheism makes you a better scientist? Not at all. It just means it's better to have no religion than to have a false religion. The Baal worshippers had a false religion. It kept them from grasping the truth. But atheism is a false religion too. Atheism's a belief system, and a dogmatic atheist will be just as biased in his research as a Baal worshipper would be. Good scientists should be skeptics, not dogmatic atheists. This word, skeptic, is another Greek contribution. The Greeks called people skeptical if they believed that nothing could be known for sure. The skeptics avoided making any specific claims about anything. There were other schools, the Cynics, the Stoics, each a school of Greek philosophy. These Greek philosophers couldn't agree on much, but by asking new questions about the meaning of life, they laid the foundations for Western thought. Greek civilization flowered quickly, but not for long. The golden age of Greece was brief but amazing. As a culture, Greece went to seed very quickly, but the seeds it sowed helped form Western civilization as we know it.